on the one hand, 72 Hours is a brilliant episode of The Golden Girls, but on the other, I think there's one really, really big issue with it. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. This is the 19th episode of the 5th season of The Golden Girls. This is directed by Terry Hughes, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. I'll go through the main narrative chronologically, but we also have a subplot. Dorothy's overwhelmed with planning this banquet. It's not the most interesting story, but it works well. It definitely helps to pad out the main story. The main story focuses on the fact that Rose gets a letter from the hospital. They're asking her to come in for some tests because when she had a blood transfusion, she might have been given some HIV antibodies. There might have been some HIV antibodies in the blood, which is a letter nobody wants to receive. And my first thought was, brilliant, they're addressing a really heavy topic, something that's really important. When the Golden Girls does that, they usually get it spot on. But I do have an issue with it. And this is the fact that Rose keeps referring to it, when she goes for the test, she keeps referring to it as an AIDS test. And she does refer to it as AIDS multiple times throughout the episode. And that's kind of suggesting that HIV and AIDS are the same when they're not. And not everybody with HIV will get AIDS. And I feel like they made a huge error in implying that they're one and the same, or that if there were HIV antibodies, she would instantly or guaranteed to get AIDS. And I feel like that was such a huge error. And obviously, if anybody watching it is aware that they're not one and the same, that's not going to be an issue. But I think it could be a very educational episode, but that's a huge issue. And I think that that's a big problem with the episode, that they really conflated the two and made it seem like if there were HIV antibodies, then she would need to be tested. Well, yes, she would be needed to be tested for AIDS, of course. But that's the only thing she was being tested for, and that if she didn't have AIDS, there were no antibodies, or if there were antibodies, she absolutely had AIDS. And it's factually incorrect. And that's really irresponsible. And I think they did a really bad thing there. So yes, talking about HIV so openly, particularly at the time, I think was a really great thing for them to do. And it's very emotional. We see Rose going through a lot of anxiety, first of all, when she gets the letter, and then when she goes for the test, and then she finds out that it's going to take about 3 days to get the results. And I think it's a very realistic, believable response that she has. And if anybody is in the same situation, I think there will be an element of relatability there. So I think that's done very well. But unfortunately, there are some medical inaccuracies that are really irresponsible. Well, one medical inaccuracy. And I think that that's a really big issue. And I think they really messed up with that. So I'm struggling to say it's a great episode. But at the same time, I have to applaud them for tackling a topic that I think many shows might not want to address. And in fact, interestingly, there's an episode of Cheers, just a side tangent here, there's an episode of Cheers where Sam, I don't want to go into too much detail, but Sam is waiting to find out if something is true or not. And initially, according to, I believe I read it in James Burrows' book, but correct me if I'm wrong, initially they were going to see if he had HIV. That's what the episode was going to be about. It was going to be if he had HIV, and that's what he'd be waiting for, to the results for that. But they decided to not go with that in the end, because it is a heavy topic, and what they went with instead was a little bit more lighthearted. But clearly the Golden Girls didn't have an issue with this, and I think they did a really great job in addressing it. I just don't think they addressed it as well as they could have done. So yes, I applaud them for it, but at the same time I think they made a big error, and that's a bit of a problem. Maybe today not so much. I think it's more widely known that HIV is the virus, AIDS is the condition that can develop as a severe form of HIV. So maybe today it's not so much of an issue, but I would imagine at the time there was even less knowledge about it among the general population, and they had a responsibility to talk about it in a way that was educational and also supportive for people who are in a situation like Rose's. And they didn't quite do it. The story itself, though, very well done. It flows well, the pacing is good, the emotions are believable. It's definitely not the funniest, but I was expecting that. I certainly didn't expect this to be as funny as a lot of episodes, but at the same time, there are, of course, moments that are a little bit lighter, just to put some comedy in there so it's not too heavy. So in general, I applaud them for addressing this topic, but I also think that they made a big error in going about it the way they did, in some ways. So it's good, It could be better. But at the end of it, I still applaud the episode.